Get ready to get your questions answered by financial advisors. Learn how to put more money back in your pockets regardless of where you're starting your financial journey with your host, Hannah Mitria. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Virtual U.S. Financial Advisor podcast. I'm super excited to have Chris Wilbur here. Chris is a financial advisor at Soteria Wealth Advisors, and I really appreciate you jumping back and forth with me to make sure we could get this scheduled. And I'm really excited to talk about just estate planning, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Yeah. And before we jump into estate planning, maybe share with us a little bit about just Soteria Wealth Advisors and what you do.
Yeah, so we are a fee-only private wealth management firm backed by LPL Financial, the largest RIA in the country. So we work with individuals, families, business owners to help them achieve their wealth accumulation goals and preserve the wealth that they have accumulated to make sure that they're on track to, achieve their life's dreams and goals. That's essentially the mission. And I've been doing this for 10 years now in the financial industry and have worked with a lot of wonderful people to, make sure that they understand and know that they are on the right track.
All right. Awesome. I love that. I love that you're helping them kind of create that wealth that they can hold on to. And I feel like that's hand in hand with estate planning, because estate planning is about how do I make sure, one, when this house passes on to my children, do they not pay all these taxes on it and then end up losing money on it? So where did kind of like your, I don't know if it's passion, or where did that estate planning side of it come into your life that you really like helping clients through that process?
Yeah, so it's been an evolution over the past 10 years because I started at a hybrid insurance and investment brokerage firm and really focused on protecting people from, the risks of life, whether it's disability or a premature death, to make sure that they had the right risk management plan in place. And as a part of a comprehensive plan on risk management, estate planning is a piece of that. I also have parents, right? And they're a little bit on the older side. So now I have been focusing on this because it's becoming a real part of my life experience. And essentially, it's just the process of designating who will receive your assets and handle your responsibilities after your death or if you're incapacitated. So, it can be a heavy topic at times, but the philosophy is that you should have something in place and you don't have to be a millionaire. So one of the goals is to make sure your beneficiaries receive these things in the most cost-effective way possible. And estate planning can help establish a platform that you can fine-tune as your situation changes.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned like you don't have to be a millionaire, because, I hear estate planning and I always think of Brewster's Millions, and I can only imagine, that show movie where it's like this guy gets all those millions and he has to spend them. And I think growing up with like things like that, we definitely think estate planning is for the people that are really wealthy and just have a lot of money, because we think like, what are we passing on if we're not, super wealthy? So kind of share with us, like, how do you work with a client on that conversation of estate planning? How do you start getting through that of what they need to plan for?
Yeah. So the first question is, what are your goals, right? So whether you're, younger and still accumulating, or you're trying to retire, your goals are the most important thing when talking with someone. So if they want to pass on a legacy, or if they just want to make sure that they have enough money in retirement, we focus on that first. And then as part of that, we talk about, okay, well, we should have something in place for your estate because you will have one. And the key question is to ask yourself, how do you want your assets distributed when you die or if you become incapacitated? So that's really the key thing. And if you have kids, then you want to make sure that they're secure in their financial future and things of that nature.
And just kind of talking through it here, whenever we say estate, it's not necessarily just your house.
Right. It's everything you own. It's your house, your cars, any, retirement accounts, life insurance policies, all of the assets.
I feel like just because we hear real estate, I feel like real estate's super common knowledge. And so we know houses are estates, but when we're estate planning, we are planning every piece of our financial wealth in its future, essentially, correct?
Yeah. And, the whole process can seem quite overwhelming and complex, but to help keep it simple, you really just need to understand some basics. And, there's really only a few things that, we'll cover today.
Yeah. Do we want to kind of jump into like what are those basics that we should be looking at covering?
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing is you need to be aware of probate. Probate is a process that each individual state administers for everybody's estate. So that is state specific, and they basically execute on the estate, whether it has a will or not. And that's kind of the starting point for everything.
Yeah, I think so. I hear probate a ton, and it is definitely something that I'm like, I know what probate is, but I'll be honest, I have no idea what probate is. And I feel like it's very confusing for people. So does working with like someone like you kind of help go through that probate? Like, so if the family comes in, you're the one dealing with it, or is that something like, the family still has to deal with the probate? How does that work? And what should they
Great
expect,
question.
I guess?
So the executor of the estate is going to handle that process, but the court uses this to settle the estate. And the settlement time and the expense, it varies by state and your situation, but that's the first step. So that's just the term used to describe the process the court uses in settling the estate and the costs and the time that it takes.
All right. So just because, I own a business. And so, and my co-founder is in Virginia. And at the end of the day, we had to choose which state was a better place to have a business. In Texas, 1,000% was just a better place for business, like legal side of it. When we look at estate planning and probate planning, because you mentioned kind of like states matter. Do you have to do your probate in the state you live in, or could you do a probate in just a state that's like better? I don't know. I could be like going way outside the box and like Hannah Rain in it. It's fine.
Yeah, and that's also a great question. So first, I just want to put out a disclaimer that I'm not a lawyer. So none of this is going to be legal advice, but speaking just in general terms, wherever you own assets, whether it's in Texas or Virginia, those assets have to go through the probate process of that specific state. Okay. So let's say you own your home in Texas, but you have another home in Virginia. That home, if it's not in something called a trust, will have to go through the probate process of Virginia. So that's called ancillary probate. So it gets complex, but essentially your will is going to be the foundation of your plan. And that's going to include all of your wishes and how everything should be distributed to your beneficiaries if the assets don't have a beneficiary already designated. And probate is the process that all estates go through. However, there is a way to avoid it, which is by setting up something called a trust. And there's lots of different types of trusts, but essentially when you take assets and you transfer them into a trust, that takes them out of the probate process altogether.
Okay, because when you mentioned, you said there was the will and the trust. And so what's the difference between a will and a trust, or are they just really synonyms for each other?
So a trust is going to be an entity. It's a legal document that is set up to precede, or it's going to precede all of the instructions in a will. So a will is going to be more inclusive in terms of it's going to have like, I would like to be buried here or cremated and this and that. And the trust is going to be where you put all the assets and include instructions for the beneficiaries on how those assets are to be used and if there are any stipulations there. So they're different, but kind of the same. The will is just going to be like a guide for how your estate is to be executed. But the trust is to take any of those assets and take them out of the probate process. And those instructions and that document is going to make sure that you don't have to go through the probate process, which, like I said, can take a lot of time and it can be expensive. And if you have assets in different states, you're going to want to avoid going through multiple probate processes. Yeah. It's very timely, time consuming, and it's expensive sometimes. So having a will is great. And if that's the only thing that you do, then I fully support that. Mm-hmm. But having a trust is going to take it one step further and be an added benefit to your heirs, your beneficiaries, the people in the causes that you care about the most. So you don't have to go through that whole rigmarole of working with the state government.
Yeah, I'm like, there's so many movies going on in my head right now that go through these processes. And it's just so interesting. But when we're talking about so who that beneficiary is? Can it be multiple people, or is it one person? And how does that kind of look like?
Yeah, you have full control over that. And it can be multiple people or institutions, charities and whatnot. So let's take something specific as an example, like life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a family and then they depend on you, you should have life insurance. Or if you have a business partner, you should have contingencies in place for untimely death. So life insurance, I fully believe in the value and the benefit of having that. So when you get a life insurance policy, you have to designate a beneficiary at a minimum. So that's called the primary. And then you can also set up a contingent beneficiary. You can also have multiple. So you could split it. Like, I don't have kids, so my life insurance goes to my brother, his wife, my sister, and her husband, 25% each. So everybody is going to get a percentage of that life insurance.
Nice.
And if that primary beneficiary or beneficiaries is unable to receive that money, then it will go to the contingent beneficiary, which could be people, causes, a trust. You can use the trust to pass on that money.
Yeah, I just hope your in-laws are listening and know the deep love you have for them, that they're getting 25% of everything.
Yeah.
So with life insurance, and we're just in that world of it, and you're designating a primary, does something like that still have to go through a probate process if it's not in trust, or does life insurance have things that kind of trump what has to happen in probate since you've already designated those people?
Yeah, so a beneficiary designation is going to supersede any instructions of a will.
Okay.
And if you place that money in a trust, it will go to the trust. Mm-hmm. So the beneficiary designation is, the first designation.
Okay, got it. What are some other kind of like basics that we should know about estate planning?
Yeah, so we've been talking about trusts, so it's something that everybody should definitely consider. And when it comes to trusts, there are many different types, but they really fall into two categories. One is called revocable. Mm-hmm. The other is called irrevocable. So revocable trusts, you can change, right? They're revocable. So you can make adjustments and you can change it, at any time until you pass. And then that trust goes to the beneficiary. Mm-hmm. Irrevocable trusts, it's nearly impossible to change that trust document once it is officially established. And so there's lots of like tax implications and things of that nature that differ between revocable and irrevocable. Mm-hmm. It does get very complicated, especially if you're talking to somebody who has a significant net worth, because there's limitations as to how much is exempt from estate taxes. Mm-hmm. And this is something that the legislation has been discussing and changing over the course of time. But essentially, an irrevocable trust, you can't change it. So you need to be fully confident in the decision that you make when you set that up. The other thing is that there are other documents you should probably have in place that are called powers of attorney. And there's multiple different types, but those are directives for other people to make decisions on your behalf.
Can I jump you back to the irrevocable trust versus revocable real quick? Just so we don't get lost there. Why would anybody want an irrevocable trust? I think that's why I'm just thinking, like, if human beings as humans we're the most wish-washy species in the world. Like, we always change our minds on stuff. So what would be a reason to have an irrevocable versus just, having one that, like, oh, we're getting a divorce. Okay, now you're taking it off the will kind of thing. And I do work with a lot of like divorce attorneys. So in my mind, like, I see those kind of things happening all the time. So it's just kind of like, why would I not set up a revocable trust? So what is that reasoning that you would want irrevocable?
Yeah, it essentially comes down to taxes. There may be some other considerations as well, but essentially there are more favorable tax laws surrounding irrevocable trusts that allow that money to go to those beneficiaries. But like I said, it gets complicated, and I'm not a lawyer, so I just like to keep it, high level.
All right, yeah, no worries. I was just curious. I'm just like, make that revocable. So, but yeah,
Yeah,
let's talk about
right.
power of attorneys and what that looks like.
Okay, so yeah, the powers of attorney, there are a couple different types that I'll touch on. One is called durable power of attorney, and the other is called healthcare power of attorney. So, durable power of attorney is something that it gives your agent, the person that you decide to make decisions for you, the power to transact on real estate or enter into financial transactions and make other legal decisions on your behalf. It is revocable, so you can change that, but it should be anyone you trust. So that's durable power of attorney. Healthcare power of attorney is just what it sounds like. Typically, it's your spouse, your partner, or a family member. And it's, again, someone you trust who shares your views on issues such as DNR, do not resuscitate, and can be there to support you in that instance. So it's a backup agent should also be identified in case that person's not able to provide that assistance.
And how does that kind of fall into the wealth planning side of it, I guess? Just because since they're on the healthcare, does it impact your will or your trust? Can they make decisions that change a revocable trust if they're your healthcare power of attorney?
That is a great question, and not something that I would speak on because of the legal complications that might be involved. So, especially when you're talking about if a beneficiary of a trust is designated as your healthcare power of attorney, that creates a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
So, you're going to want to be very careful, right, about talking about these specifics when you're not an attorney.
Yeah.
But yeah, and in general, it's going to be like a family member, a spouse, partner, etc. Somebody who's going to be there for you. So it's the exclusive responsibilities are to make healthcare decisions.
And I think of it because we've seen so many movies essentially where in the final hour of their life, they're making changes on their will. And then it becomes, is it actually valid
Well,
or not? So
yeah, and that's a consideration that the doctors will have to speak on, because if you are incapacitated or if you have diminished mental capacity and you're making changes on your deathbed, then that brings up some questions. And the short answer is, like, if you're able to make changes and you want to do that, then yes, you can. But if you have a diminished mental capacity or if you're on life support and you can't speak, then that's another issue.
Right. Yeah. And I totally get some of these are legal things that, this is not a
It's
legal
very
podcast.
legal.
No legal advice is happening here. So if you're a healthcare power of attorney, go talk to an attorney for sure about those things. I'm just a curious being, so I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So if they have the power attorneys in place, what if they don't end up needing them? So what do those next steps look like?
Well, then you're happy, healthy, and living your life. So it's just contingency plan just in case, so if a husband or a wife, if somebody gets in a horrific car accident and they're in the hospital and they're in a coma, then the healthcare power of attorney is going to be there to make a decision or, multiple decisions. So that is just one specific estate planning document of a whole array of documents that together form an estate plan. So, everybody thinks that an estate plan is just for the wealthy and it's only to avoid taxes. That's not necessarily the case. So you've got these power of attorneys, but if you have kids, you should also have something in place called guardianship designations. And this isn't, calling up your buddy and saying, hey, I'd like you to be the godfather, which I am a godfather, so I can speak to this. I am not the designated guardianship person for my friend's daughter, Vivian, right? So they are going to have to set up guardianship designations for her and for James, their son, in case something were to happen. They would have those people, the guardians would have the legal responsibility and duty to care for those children until they're of age.
Yeah, it's not as easy as just saying you're the godfather, you're the godmother. There are legal implications. And so that's all kind of built into that trust that you have to create, even if you don't have millions to do.
Yeah, exactly. The guardianship designations are, again, a legal issue. Being a godfather is a religious issue.
Yeah. And I really like kind of understanding those different ways that you might need an estate plan, because I think we don't know all those ways we need an estate plan. Like, as we go back to the beginning when we talked about, like, you don't have to be a millionaire, but in our minds, we think we do to need these kind of documents.
Yeah, and I would say just in general, if you're young and trying to accumulate wealth, you don't have to have much or anything really to have at least just a will, right? So putting a will in place is step one, and then talking to an attorney about benefits of a revocable trust. And then if you have kids, then you get into the guardianship stuff. If you're married, having powers of attorney. And then once you do accumulate wealth, then you can revisit all of these topics and make it a little bit more specific and more geared towards other considerations such as taxes or charitable giving, those types of things. And again, like I said, it gets very complicated where if you have a business and let's say it's going to be worth $50 million, but you and your business partners and or your partner, wife, spouse, if you guys own that and you're getting ready to sell that business and you're going to create a very big tax event, there are ways to structure additional trusts to provide you with other tax benefits while you're still alive. So you can avoid a lot of taxes by setting something up like that. I mean, essentially, you want to do it sooner rather than later. And it's a good idea to, once you have established this baseline plan, have a conversation with your family. So this might be one of the most important aspects of having an estate plan because it's going to have implications and effects on other people. So obviously, death is a really tough topic, but everybody dies. And if you're younger, that may seem like something that can be dealt with much later, but no one ever knows just when and will something happens. So, discussing your wishes, your relatives' wishes, also like your aging parents, is something that I would encourage people to do. So, making sure that your parents are protected, right? Whether that's from any potential long-term care needs, that's a very expensive thing to have. So there's so many different ways that things can unfold that if you have these plans in place, it will alleviate some of that pain. And it will make it much easier, much quicker, because the last thing you want to do is sit in a courtroom for 6 months and try to figure out what the probate court is going to do with your family's assets. So again, another reason to have a trust so that those assets automatically, essentially, get directed to who it's intended for.
Yeah. So I love that you mentioned, like, have that conversation with their family and just start making those plans. So for anyone listening, what's that first step after they've had those conversations with the plan? Like, who do they reach out to? Is it you or is it an attorney? Where does those next steps go? And from there?
Either or both, right? So I'm not an attorney, but I know lots of great ones who will actually be the ones to execute these documents. They will draft them for you. I can review them with you and make sure that it is properly written to be there for you and to accomplish those goals that you've set out for yourself. So this is just one aspect of the overarching theme of financial planning, which everybody knows is related to money and what your goals are and what sort of, maybe some investments that you should have, but also the insurance aspect. So it all comes full circle. So that's why I work on a fee-only basis to help my clients on every aspect of their entire financial life. And then when you are ready to set up an estate plan, you do have to go meet with an attorney and they will help that for you.
Yeah, definitely. So if somebody's here looking on hiring a wealth manager, financial advisor, how can they find you, Chris?
Yeah, so if you're thinking about these things, then you can reach out to me on LinkedIn at soteriawealthadvisors.com, and we can help you with a comprehensive strategy as well as refer you to good attorneys who focus on and are board certified in estate planning. So we've got the resources to facilitate that introduction and implement it into your overall financial plan.
All right, awesome. So reach out to Chris if you're ready for your estate planning. And remember, you don't need to be a millionaire to have an estate plan. And also you want to have an estate plan early on for things that aren't even money side of it. So if you have kids, things like that. So definitely reach out to Chris, and all of his information will be below. Thank you so much for kind of sharing this estate planning side of it with us, and, you know, listening to my ridiculous questions and helping through those different things. So I've loved having you on.
Oh, they were great questions. Thank you for having me as well.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Virtual U.S. Financial Advisor Podcast. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or via RSS so you'll never miss an episode. We'd love a rating on iTunes, or better yet, tell a friend about the show, which will help us grow as well. If you want to learn from any of our financial advisors, head over to our website, virtualusfinancialadvisor.com, to learn more about each financial advisor and connect with them personally. Be sure to tune in next week to get more advice from the expert financial advisors. See you on the next episode.